Welcome to Crime Waves. My name is Declan Hill. I was an investigative journalist for much of my career, and now I'm an associate professor of investigations at the University of New Haven. And each week on Crime Waves, myself and some of my students will bring you these episodes. My absolute professional passion is how and why organized criminals get into sport. I've written a number of best-selling books on the subject. One of them, The Fix, had the good fortune to be available in 21 languages and has been optioned by Hollywood producers. So we're going to start this week with an event featuring a former National Basketball Association, that's NBA, referee, Tim Donaghy. And he's admitted to working with people to bet on dozens of the games that Donaghy was reffing in the NBA. This interview has a special format. It's actually the recording of an event, the launch of the Graduate Certificate in Sports Integrity that I'm running here at the University of New Haven. So there's going to be one section in this episode where you hear some of my students ask Tim Donaghy questions. And for anyone who's not been 19 years old, it might be intensely painful. For the rest of us, you'll hear actually some really good questions to Donaghy asked in a somewhat shy manner. However, bear with it because I think you're going to be interested overall in Donaghy's stories. He's very open about his own personal gambling addiction, and what he alleges is the corruption in the structure of the NBA during his time. We hope you enjoy the story of greed, corruption in one of the world's biggest sports leagues. Welcome to Crime Waves.
Let's turn now to our main speaker of the night. Tim Donaghy is an extraordinary guy with an extraordinary story. If you've done any research, you cannot overstate how controversial a figure he is. Virtually any time you walk on a blog or an article, there's something declaiming this or declaiming that about Tim Donaghy's character. I'd like to state my personal perspective. Tim has always honored his commitments. He's always been very straightforward with me, and has really been a great joy and a credit to work with. His story is one of a Greek tragedy. He had it all and he threw it away. It's not a pleasant story to listen to. Tim will speak for the next 15, 20 minutes, and then he's open to questions. You can see, I think, that my students, my undergraduate students who are 18, 19, 20, 21 will be asking some questions, but we're going to open this up to people around the world to ask questions as well. And Tim has said, look, ask away. Just, I'll do my best to answer them, and I'll answer them. So, Tim, thank you so much for joining us. We're, greatly honored to have you here, and the floor is now yours. Thank you.
I appreciate you having me, and I thank you from the bottom of the heart, because every time I get the opportunity to speak in front of 5, 10, 15, thousands of people, I think it's an opportunity to possibly avoid somebody else from making a poor decision that's not only going to affect themselves, but the people that they love the most, and that's their family. So with that being said, I'd like to give you the short version of the story, because I feel when in a group setting like this, questions and answers are something that can really allow people to get to the bottom of what I did, how I did it, and maybe how they can avoid making some poor decisions in their life. So with that being said, I was an NBA referee for 13 years. I grew up in a Irish Catholic family out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Went to the best schools, Cardinal O'Hara High School and Villanova University. And from there, I was fortunate enough to get involved in an NBA training program and become an NBA basketball referee. With that being said, unfortunately, I started to hang out with the wrong people and hang out at country clubs and got hooked on gambling. And it was a situation where I loved the golf. I started betting on the golf course, spilled over into betting on college or professional sports, and then eventually going down to casinos in Atlantic City and being on the road, going to casinos on the road. With that being said, I was hanging out with a great guy named Jack, who came to me one day with the Philadelphia Daily News and said, "Hey, listen, we're betting on a lot of stuff. What about the NBA? You have a little bit of inside knowledge. Can you give me some tips?" I really didn't think much about it, other than the fact I had just come from home and looked at who was refereeing that night. So with that being said, relationships existed within the NBA, positive and negative. And I gave him 3 picks for that night, and all 3 won. And he called me up the next day and asked me if it was that easy to pick NBA games. And I explained to him that it was, because there was relationships that existed, both positive and negative, and that spilled off onto the NBA floor. And people would put at advantages and disadvantages based on who was refereeing the game. And, I crossed some lines that I should have never been near. And at times I started to realize that and self-reflect. And we would stop and we would start back up because, he was a good friend of mine, and he would maybe go to the casino and lose $20,000 or $25,000. So we would start and stop. And eventually one time I said, Jack, that's it. I don't want to do it anymore. And what I didn't realize is that he was transferring these picks that I was giving him to people that were associated with organized crime. So that last time that we stopped, I received a phone call from a guy that I went to high school with. And he said, "Listen, the next time you're in Philadelphia, I want to meet you for dinner." With that being said, I set it up. I walked down into the lobby to meet my high school buddy, and he had another guy with him that was also a guy that went to our high school that was associated with the Gambino crime family. They took me for a ride in a car and basically explained to me that they've known what I had been doing for the last several years with Jack, and that if I didn't continue to give those guys the picks that I had been given to Jack, that somebody was going to visit my wife and kids in Florida, or they were going to expose me to the NBA that I had been betting on games. With that being said, they kind of had me between a rock and a hard place, as they say. And I agreed to give them picks because I felt like I was being threatened, and my kids and my ex-wife at the time was being threatened. I gave them picks for the next 3 months, and the mob gave me a nickname. And that nickname was Elvis, because I was the king of giving them correct picks in the NBA. I made them tens of millions of dollars in that short period of time. And I was hoping that at the end of that 3 months that this was going to go away. I was going to go back to being an NBA referee, and nothing was ever going to be said again about it. But at the end of those 3 months, they made so much money that the FBI started an internal investigation and had realized that a referee was giving them some information. With that being said, they had knocked on a lot of people's doors. Tommy Martino, who set up that initial meeting, had called me and had told me that the FBI had knocked on his door and that an investigation had started. With that being said, I totally hit the panic button. I went to a buddy who was an attorney of mine who called the United States attorney who was working the case. I was in his office when he called the United States attorney, and I was on speakerphone with him. And he said, "Listen, you give Tim Donaghy a message. You tell him that we know what he did, we know who he did it with, and we know how he did it. And it's just a matter of time before we come get him. He's much better off coming to us before we come to him, because if we have to come to him, not only is he going to lose his job, but he's going to go to jail for a long, long time." With that, I waited about a couple weeks. I had lost 30 pounds in less than 30 days, and I thought it was in my best interest and my family's best interest, with everything that had been associated with Batista, who was the guy that was associated with the Gambino crime family, that I should make an appointment and go up and speak to them. I got an attorney. We flew up to New York. They put me in a room. In that room, there was a whiteboard, and it said gambling, 5 to 10 years. Racketeering, 5 to 10 years. Money laundering, 5 to 10 years. I'm sitting in this room by myself, all boxes stacked to the ceiling marked John Gotti trial. So before I could really get my thoughts together, I'm starting to realize I'm in a lot of trouble. With that being said, everybody comes into the room. Phil Scala, who's the supervisory special agent for the investigation into the Gambino crime family, puts his finger right in my face and he says, listen, you're sitting in the same fucking seat John Gotti sat in. I got John Gotti. So if you're going to think that you're going to lie to me, get the fuck up and leave right now. With that being said, of course, I was already in panic mode, but I really went into panic mode. And I told them everything that I did, how I did it, who I did it with, and to the extent of which I did it. With that, after that initial meeting, I became a cooperating witness for the culture of fraud that existed within the NBA and people associated with the Gambino crime family. To give you the short version of it, I was given the code name by the mob of Elvis because I was the king of giving them NBA picks, and I was given the code name by the people that were investigating the Gambino crime family, and that was Swish. And I was not to discuss the case with anybody unless they first used that code name. So as we continued to move on and I became a cooperating witness about how I was able to provide such a high percentage of winning picks to the mob, the FBI began to realize that there was a culture of fraud that existed and that the NBA had some issues themselves. With that being said, and being a witness against the culture of fraud in the NBA and the Gambino crime family, that I was not in a great position in my life, and I was offered the witness protection plan, and there were a lot of things that I needed to do to help myself and my family. With that being said, I gave a lot of information that helped and cleaned up the NBA and went against the Gambino crime family. And although I was given that initial promise to avoid jail if I was truthful and honest and helped, they didn't hold up their end of the bargain, and I was given 15 months in a federal prison. And with that being said, being in a federal prison and being a cooperating witness against certain people, it's not the position you want to be in when your name's all over the TV and people are being told what you did, and you're entering a federal prison and you're quickly labeled a rat. And unfortunately for me, I was beaten up in prison, and I've since had 3 knee operations to try and alleviate the pain from being attacked in prison from people that claimed that they were associated with the Gambino crime family. And, my life slowly but surely was spiraling out of control because of a lot of poor decisions that I made that stemmed back all the way to the point where I decided to gamble. And it was just one bad decision after another. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, it not only affected myself, but the people I love the most when you talk about having 4 daughters. So with that being said, I did my time in a federal prison. Got out of the federal prison, and I've started to rebuild my life and share my story with different people to hopefully not, make them think that crossing that line that you shouldn't be near is okay, whether it's gambling or whatever personal choices that you start to make in your life where you know that you're wrong. So I've been very fortunate to meet people like yourself that allow me to share my story and allow me to hopefully get people not to cross that line that you really shouldn't be near in life, especially when you're very fortunate to have a high-profile position like I did as an NBA referee, making close to $400,000 a year, traveling across the country, running up and down the floor with the greatest athletes in the world. With that being said, I think when you talk about, a lot of the positions that a lot of these guys are in that we spoke to earlier today and have access to these young college adults that, haven't been in the position to really make poor decisions in their life. I love the fact that I can maybe share my story and let these young individuals know that poor decisions are something that, affect a lot of different people. And the worst thing for me with my poor decisions was of course, my 4 daughters, but my father was a top college basketball referee throughout the country, refereed the Final Four for 4 straight years. So with that being said, we had so many connections within the basketball world that it was not only an embarrassment for me, but for my father too. So it's something that I really get, in depth about in the book that I wrote, Personal Foul. So, it's something that I love to share the story to a certain extent because I feel like I can get to people and try and touch them into realizing how important decisions are to helping, a lot of other people in the world. So, with that being said, I think that there's a lot of questions that people have in regard to the story. And rather than getting into so much depth about the story, that I think, a question and answer situation is something that, helps more than me kind of rambling on and talking about the story to the point where, some people may be bored or really start to drift off a little bit. So, with that being said, I no questions, as I say to you, at any point are off limits. I have nothing to hide when you're, in the position I am in and what I've gone through. I like to be an open and honest book because, as Phil Scott, likes to say, he was the guy who pointed his finger in my face, felt that I was so open and honest that, he wrote the foreword for my book. And I'm very grateful for that. So, with that being said, whatever anybody has in regard to how I can help them understand what I did and maybe why I did it, that, there's opportunity there for us all to learn.
Tim, thank you very much. I can guarantee you that no one is bored by this conversation, and it's been really an eye-opener. I know we've got a bunch of questions coming in. I'm looking at my screen. We've got 10, 11 coming in. But as the moderator, I'm going to ask the question that is the elephant in the room. You know what's coming down the pipeline now. Everybody wants to know the answer to this. Did you match fix games in the NBA? Aside from sports gambling, did you match fix?
I think that's a great question, and it's a fair question. And here's how I like to answer that. Did I make calls in games that put teams at advantages or disadvantage? Absolutely. But with that being said, the NBA dictated to the referees what they wanted called and how they wanted them called. For example, if there was a 7-game series in the playoffs and a team was up 3-0, they would put the 3 referees or the 4 referees with an alternate into the meeting and go over previous plays that happened in the other games and tell them what they wanted them to concentrate on that night. And it always went in favor of teams that were down in the series and against teams that were up in the series. So with that being said, they were always trying to extend those series in a way that was beneficial to more games, more revenue, and a situation where it would go from 3-0 to 3-1, possibly 3-2, or extended to a 7-game series where, it was more revenue for everybody involved.
Tim, let me unpick this. There's a fantastic book by a guy, Brian Toohey, called The Fix Is In, where he talks about this being systemic. I want to stress that you're talking about the NBA between 2003 and 2008. There have been substantial changes in the NBA since those days. But you're implying that there was a organized systemic corruption to push the series towards the big teams or the big markets. Is this right?
I'm not implying. I'm flat out telling you that we would walk out of those meetings as 4 referees, 3 on the floor and an alternate, and say, "Oh, geez, they really want the Lakers to win tonight, or they really want, the Pistons to win tonight." And I talk about different stories in the book where I'll give you an example where Dallas was playing the Houston Rockets back in the Yao Ming days, and Houston was up, I believe it was 2-0, heading back to Houston. And everyone knows the history of the NBA. If you're up 2-0, you're heading back to your home floor, there's a good chance you're going to win that series. Mark Cuban was so vocal in complaining about Yao Ming traveling in the post, Yao Ming setting illegal screens, that he bitched and complained so much to the league office. That's all they concentrated on in the meetings with the NBA referees. And Dallas went in and won the next 2 games on Houston's home floor and ended up winning in 7 games. So, there's a lot of things that took place in those situations to where, things dictated by the NBA league office, dictated to the referees in a situation where teams were put at advantages and disadvantage. And with that being said, the NBA dictated to us what they want to call it on the floor, and teams were put at advantages.
Tim, we've got now 22 questions. We're going to get through them. I'm going to give a chance for my students to ask as well. But I just want to make sure that my credibility is on the line here and that I'm asking you tough, rigorous, fair questions.
And not to interrupt you, but as I've said in the past, and nothing's off limits, please ask me or have your students.
Let me ask you this question directly. You were betting on yourself as a referee in those games. How could you not have been biased towards a team that you're going to make $5,000-6,000 on if they won the game? How is that possible that you could have not favored them?
Great question. Before I made a decision on what team that I passed along for the Gambino crime family to bet on, I knew what took place in that meeting. So as soon as we left that meeting at 11 a.m. With the people from the NBA league office, I knew who was at advantage or disadvantage. And not to, put myself up on a pedestal or not to make myself look good, but there were situations where we were winning 80 to 90% of the time. So if we lost a game, I really wasn't concerned about that. We had such a high percentage and the information was so good on what the referees were going to do, whether I was an alternate, whether I was a referee on the floor, or whether I was, a referee where one of my buddies called me and said, "Hey, listen, you're not going to believe this, but this is what they want us to do tonight." There was such a high percentage of winning that there was never a situation where I felt that much pressure to go out on the floor and put Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, LeBron James to the bench with 3, 4, or 5 fouls so that a team won.
Tim, let me take a question now. Participants, type in your questions. We're reading them constantly. This is from Ian. Have any players, I presume NBA players, reached out to you to express frustration or maybe even condolences? Have you ever heard from any of the players?
Believe it or not, a lot of condolences. Not only have I heard from NBA owners with the movie Inside Game coming out, I've heard from a lot of NBA players. And, they were extremely frustrated with the way the game was refereed. And they were extremely frustrated knowing that, certain things were going on based on what the league wanted. And they were extremely frustrated. So after the whole scandal took place, there was supposedly a lot of changes that took place. And, being in contact with a lot of the FBI agents at the time, and they're still associated with the FBI right now, you like to think that a lot of things took place to where the NBA is more on the up and up. But when you see certain things take place and teams down in a series and things turn around, you kind of think that the bottom line and the revenue stream is more important to them rather than going out there and having the officials officiate, the game based on things that take place on the court and not the names on the front and the back of jerseys as it is in
You've
college.
got now, Tim, you've got multi-billion-dollar companies monitoring the gambling lines, which you simply didn't have in those days. So you can't have that gambling side that you did. Let me ask you a question from Provost Boyd, Lorenzo Boyd, a former Boston police officer who's now at the University of New Haven. He says, were there any players involved in cheating or fixing that you saw? You don't have to name any names, but did you ever see any things that made you suspicious of players?
Not really to that extent, to be honest with you. I really never concentrated on that. There, of course, was a lot of rumors with Michael Jordan being involved in gambling, but to the extent of what I was involved in, it was just so easy for me to make correct picks based on what the NBA wanted referees to do. The information was so easily obtained that, unfortunately for me, as I stated earlier, I crossed lines that I shouldn't have been near. I should have been stronger as a person and as a human being to put that stuff aside and enforce those rules.
Okay, so you didn't see any players that are coming in. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the section here. I'm going to turn questions over to my students. For those of you who have never been 19 or 20, it's going to be painful for you, but I'm very proud of my students. And this, I want you guys to see as well what it's like to be a student. You get this kind of opportunity where you get to speak to a man like Tim Donaghy or Vitaly Stepnova directly. Jason Clark, you're an NCAA hockey player for our university. You're up first. Can you ask your questions here of Tim and just conduct your brief interview, and then we'll go back to these other questions coming in from around the world.
Hey, Tim. How are you? So I just had a couple questions. My first one was there ever a time that during your entire journey that you kind of felt you had really crossed the line, and like before that call that the FBI had been involved, was there ever a time that you thought, okay, I think that they're kind of onto us, sort of thing?
Not that they were onto us, just the fact that I just felt so guilty about what I was doing. And unfortunately, I had the greatest job in the world. Like I said earlier, running up and down the floor with the greatest athletes in the world. And I started to put my head on the pillow and think, what the heck am I doing? I have a great life, a great family. And unfortunately, I started getting up against the line and then crossing the line and jumping over the line and doing things that I shouldn't have even been near because of the people that I was hanging out with. And, unfortunately for me, the weak mindset, that was, in me that made me do things that I shouldn't have been doing.
Right. That totally makes sense. I mean, it's hard to pass by all of those things that are coming by, all the money that you could possibly gain into. So.
But also, when you talk about making $400,000 a year, the money shouldn't have been a aspect in it. My problem was I just enjoyed the excitement of gambling. I love the fact that I had this inside information, almost like I had the winning lottery numbers before, they're drawing at 7 p.m. So, a little bit of a weak character flaw in myself. Maybe it was insecurity. I'm not sure, but as a young adult, as you are yourself, you have to be able to be stronger than that. You have to be able to push those people and those thoughts aside and do what's best for you and best for your family.
Yeah, for sure. My next question was, if you had to go back and lay out the entire journey, do you feel that you sort of ruined some of the integrity of the NBA, or the integrity of the NBA kind of ruined you sort of with those meetings that you were talking about?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think was I guilty? Absolutely, I was guilty. Did I make poor decisions? Absolutely. But when you talk about the NBA, again, the league should be officiated based on the rules that are implied in the rule book, and it shouldn't have anything to do with the names on the front and the back of jerseys. And that's what spilled into the officiating and how they wanted the game called. And when you have Kobe Bryant having a different set of rules than what somebody else has, it's not the way the league should be called. I'll give you an example. Phil Jackson sent in a training tape, to the NBA office based on how many plays he thought Kobe went to the hole and wasn't given a foul and the opportunity to go to the line when he should have. And that spilled down from the league office to the NBA referees, and it spilled down into meetings with the officials. And I knew I was one of the first crews that had a game with the Lakers, and that the three of us were going to put him to the line, whether somebody breathed on him or not, and it, was going to take place for the next 3 games. So that was kind of information that I got from the league office that spilled out and affected these point spreads that Vegas put out that were probably off by 2, 3, even 4 points, and the Gambino crime family was able to, profit from it.
Oh, I mean, that's amazing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jason. Tim, let me ask a question which is coming up frequently in the 58 questions that we've got. Do you think gambling had anything to do with Michael Jordan taking a hiatus in 1994?
It's tough for me to say. I get that question a lot, but absolutely it did. When you talk about, somebody, in the league as high profile as he was, I think it was easier for them to kind of push him to the side, maybe give him a break a little bit, rather than addressing, that scenario. So I definitely think that had a little bit of pushing him into retirement a little bit quicker than bringing him back.
And do you think, this is another question that's coming up frequently, do you think that there is 2 sets of rules in the NBA, one for the stars, one for everyone else?
Absolutely. No doubt about it. I was a young referee when, I first came into the league, and Jordan was in the league, and Jess Kersey, God rest his soul, who is now passed away, said to me, when Jordan goes to the hole and he misses a shot and he's driving to the basket, you're not sure whether he's fouled or not, blow the whistle, because he's not, a star in this league for nothing. And if he missed a shot, he missed a shot for a reason. So just put him to the line. You're better off putting him to the line rather than being not sure and getting some heat from it.
Tim, let me introduce you to another of my students, Aaron Griffin. Aaron and I are working on a project down in DC at the moment in terms of fighting for sports integrity. Aaron, you're up now, please.
Thank you. Hi, Tim. It's a great opportunity to be able to talk to you. I just have a few questions kind of based off some little research that I've done myself. And my first question is, when you're reffing a game, so would you say you were more lenient with the team you were betting on, you would be more hesitant to call a foul on them? Or do you truly think you were making the right calls the whole entire time and wasn't lenient more than the team you're betting and not?
Again, a great question. I did a lot of those questions in regard to that. Phil Scala, who was the supervisory special agent, for the Gambino crime family, had me put in my book that he felt subconsciously that there were times where I would lean towards the team that, I passed along, betting information to the mob family. But to me, I like to think that I didn't. I hope that I didn't. But, again, there were so many wins that took place that I was never in a position where I had to go out and make sure that I favored certain teams, certain players, to the point where a bet won because, somebody was going to show up at my house the next day with a gun.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that. And my other question is, as I was doing some reading, there was brought up about Shauna Vircher, your publicist. And I was just wondering if it was true that when you were asked to take a polygraph by her, to straight up be asked if you did fix any of the games, and you had said you couldn't because you would fail it.
That was an absolute lie with her. She stole $250,000 from me. So when everything was going down, she was trying to do everything she could to discourage me from suing her, which I ended up suing her and winning $1.8 million. But there were times where I did take a polygraph and I passed, and the FBI was given the opportunity to give me a polygraph, but they felt there was no need to do that. So anything that she comes out with comes with a lot of fabrication and has no truth to it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Aaron, thank you for those questions. Let me pull one out. There's a gentleman from Bet Genius who's phoned in or has asked this question saying, is there any system that you think could identify player or referee corruption or fraud now? Is there some way of developing that?
No, I think what you have to do is you have to give the referees the confidence to go out and officiate these games based on the rules written in the rule book and not the names on the front and back of jerseys. I think you have to distance the officiating staff from the league office put them in a central location in maybe Dallas or Atlanta, and really have somebody run the officiating program that has nothing to do with the league office, so that there's no need to advance a team or a player or a situation, from the NBA league office's agenda.
So completely an independent.
Absolutely.
So completely
And
hands-off.
I think Phil Jackson has come out a number of times and suggested that also after I had suggested it.
Let's talk a little bit about how you got paid. There's a question here. Could you give us a little bit more details of the whole payment flow? Did you always receive it cash or bank transfers? The money flow network, financial institutions, how did that work?
It's funny because everything that you read about in the mob, where it's cash and paper bags and hidden agendas, is everything that took place in my situation. Tommy Martino flew into different cities with me, paid me cash and brown paper bags, just like they do in the movies. So it was a situation where a lot of that stuff that you get from the mob and you read and you think about is what took place with me.
Question coming in from Lebanon, Noor Nasrallah, quote, prison makes you think. Did you already decide that you want to change your life while in prison, or did it happen after you got out?
Prior to prison, I was before I went into prison, I had a year as being a cooperating witness. So it was very difficult for me because I knew that I was going to go to prison, and I knew that there was a lot of things that I needed to do and change about my life because, I was a risk taker. I was somebody that liked to gamble, and I was somebody that unfortunately made a lot of poor decisions. So with that being said, I knew immediately that there was a lot of changes I needed to, make.
I got a question here, both from New York and also our colleagues over in Austria. They're extremely upset that in the big long list of countries that I said at the beginning that I didn't mention Austria. So I'm sorry. Dankeschön, guys. I'm so sorry. But Scott in New York and the Austrians say, look, is there corruption and fixing going on in the NBA today? Is there a climate of fraud, in your opinion, in the NBA?
Absolutely. Again, I think we touched about this a couple minutes ago, but when you look at the names on the front and back of jerseys, it comes into play when people are blowing the whistle. And fortunately for the NBA, when David Stern, God rest his soul, believe it or not, I will say that, when he said some things, and when a reporter asked him at one point, what is your ideal matchup for the NBA Finals? He said, my ideal matchup would be the Lakers versus the Lakers. And everybody got a big chuckle out of that, but he said it on national TV, and he said it because, that would bring the most global exposure to the NBA. So, with that being said, it's no secret that, New York, Boston, LA bring global exposure, bring more, attention to the league and bring more money to the league. So,
Tim, that being said, that's David Stern. We've now got a new replacement in the NBA. They brought in a massive number of integrity issue things since your day. Let me go to another question, which is coming up frequently. We've now got almost.
Can I answer that real quick?
Let me come to this one because it's a question about the relationships and the referees. What do you mean by that when you talk about that? What are you actually articulating there?
There's positive and negative relationship, just like anything in life. But positive and negative, think about this, that exists between referees and coaches, referees and players, and referees and owners. So when you go out onto the floor and you are playing golf with Michael Jordan in the summer, he's going to get the benefit of calls that you may not give Larry Bird because you don't play golf with him in the summer. If you have a great relationship with Mark Cuban, you may not, give Dallas or his people the benefit of calls that you give to somebody else. So it all depends on those relationships. A lot of people hated Mark Cuban. I personally like the guy. I felt like the league office went out of their way to stick it to him every chance they got. And I think that's one reason why he lost that NBA Finals to Miami the first time they played. The head of officials, Ed Rush, at the time, couldn't stand him. and it was no secret. So in those tape sessions, Ed Rush was pointing out everything that he could after Miami was up in that series. Dallas was up in that series to go against them. So it's just different situations that took place that put teams at advantages or disadvantages.
Okay, Tim, I'd like to introduce you to Nicholas Malloy. Nicholas is one of my students. He was with me in Prato, Italy last year when we did an organized crime course together. He did a fantastic research project on the Hells Angels. And I respect this young man's intellect so much that he and I are actually writing a journal article on match fixing in esports. But Nicholas, the stage is yours. Please ask your questions of Mr. Donaghy.
First and foremost, thank you for speaking to us today. I really appreciate it. In a 2019 interview between you and Patrick Bet-David, you had mentioned that NBA referee Dick Bavetta was the NBA's go-to guy to ref Game 6s of the playoffs because he would make the game series go to 7 games. So my question to you is, do you believe the NBA still uses its officiating staff to influence the outcome of their games?
No, I do. I don't think to the extent that what they did with Bavetta. Bavetta would tell us, he was, quote, the NBA's go-to guy. He was put on Game 6s to make sure Game 7s took place. And there's a history of that. There's a history of, if you look at the percentages of how many Game 6s go to a Game 7 when teams play on their home floor, it's not that often. But when Dick Bavetta was on those games, the percentages shot way up. And Dick Bavetta was a guy that openly talked about, what was great for the league, how, revenue for the league was very important. So with that being said, I don't think it's to the extent that took place when Bavetta was on the floor, because I think there's a lot of eyes watching now. But when there's situations where, you're in a locker room and you're talking about how to officiate a game, you're always going to give the team that's down in the series the benefit of those calls.
All right, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I would agree with that. And then my final question to you is, you've also mentioned that you and your family have been targeted by the mob. Your family in Florida was threatened by the mob, and you were attacked in prison, actually, by a member of the mob. So do you think in today's date, you are still targeted by the mob?
No, I like to think not. I do have constant contact with FBI agents out of New York and ones in Florida here. So they constantly tell me that if anything comes over a wiretap that my name's involved, they would get to me and inform me as soon as possible. I like to think that this situation is something that's in the past, but you always have to have your eyes and your ears open and be aware of your surroundings. So for me, it goes back to the poor choices that I made, and it's part of the script that I put myself in. And unfortunately, I hope that it never happens, but I'm always well aware when I go out in public who I'm with and where I'm at.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tim, let me ask you a couple of questions. There's an excellent book out there, Sean Patrick Griffith's Gaming the Game. The main source of that book, as you know, is Jimmy Batista, the man that would lay the bets, the man that met you on December 12th, 2006. He claims he had nothing to do with the Gambino crime family. He claims that this is a cover story, that he was simply a gambler who worked with you. What is your perspective on that?
I've never read the book. I don't agree with a lot of things that Sean Patrick Griffin says. I really don't know him. I know people that have dealt with him, including people within the FBI, and they say that he always quotes anonymous sources, and there's really no truth to a lot of things that he says. And really, that's the only thing that I can really say about the guy. I really don't know him or what he does, and I can only know that I've dealt with FBI agents, and they've said that I've told the truth at every turn, and that's where I'm at with that whole situation.
And you were attacked in prison.
Right. I was attacked by a guy that claimed to be associated with organized crime, attacked me with a pole and did damage to my knee.
And as he's smashing in your kneecap, is he saying, I'm smashing in your kneecap because you were a jerk and you talked about the NBA? Or is he saying, I'm smashing in your kneecap for other reasons, like exposing gambling at the prison? Was there any, I know in those circumstances, your knee's being hit and you're being beaten up.
This was something that was a week in the making. So it was a situation where I was the snitch. And when you're going into a federal prison and every TV in the prison is saying that I was a cooperating witness against people associated with organized crime, it's not the label that you want, because there's a lot of people in prison, because somebody helped testify against them, although 90% of the people in prison were cooperating witnesses. So it's just a tough situation, but, being somebody that it's broadcasted throughout the country that you're a cooperating witness labeled me a snitch and hurt me.
One question from our participants here. How did the unregulated offshore bookmaking sections benefit this? For example, the high liquidity European and Asian markets. Were there feeds of information to these markets external to the United States?
I think when you talk about, the information and the high winning percentage, people were able to track that. So Batista, for example, was moving millions and millions of dollars for a lot of people, betting with people within the United States, but more outside the United States. So with that being said, there was a lot of people that were able to piggyback off of his picks, and even though the lines were moving, make an enormous amount of money. So there was a lot of people that benefited.
Let's talk about your gambling addiction. We're moving around the questions here. Austin Dominguez, who's also a student of mine, writes, in previous interviews and in your book, you've stated you grew up with a very competitive mindset, especially when playing sports. Did that mentality play a role in your becoming a gambling addict?
Sure. I think when you look at the history of a gambling addict, they all grew up playing sports. They all love sports. They all have a competitive nature. And when you can't play in that competitive nature anymore, you look for another outlet, and that's in the gambling market. So to me, I think that there has a lot of connection to do with that. And, unfortunately for me, I was extremely competitive growing up. Even to this day, I'm extremely competitive. So it's something that I think when you profile the gambler, it's something that, is associated with them.
Brian asks here, why didn't the FBI follow up on this information of the NBA essentially manipulating their own games when Tim was giving them this issue? How come that wasn't a bigger issue?
I love that question, and it's a great question, and a question that I love when I get it, because if you look at the NBA, and at the end of every game it says the NBA is a form of entertainment, just like they promote wrestling or any fictitious sport. And Phil Scala, who is the supervisory special agent, told me that the NBA can conduct their business, or they can do whatever they want to do with the officials and tell them to call whatever they want to call at any given time. So it's a form of entertainment, and whatever it is, regardless if people are betting millions of dollars on it in Vegas, they can conduct their business any way they want.
Speaking about conducting your business in Vegas, Rich Brody is writing. Rich is a distinguished professor, and he writes, addictions are very common with frauds. Addictions are also very hard to get rid of. What did you do, if anything, with respect to your gambling addiction to keep on the up and up? Do you ever gamble?
I don't gamble, no, but I've gone to, Gamblers Anonymous. I've gone to, different counselors. So, it's a situation for me where I was able to get it under control for the simple reason, and I think a lot of people that are parents will understand this. If you see the damage from your mistakes that you've implemented on your children, on your parents, on your brothers, or on your sisters, that's enough for you to stop anything. And in my situation, I inflicted a lot of damage to my parents and to my children, to where, there's no need for me to go back down that road. There's no need for me to do that ever again. So I think that I've been given a second chance, most importantly with my kids. So if they felt that I was doing that, I'd lose a lot of respect and a lot of love from them. So it's a road that, you just never want to go down again.
Andrew Zimbalist, who's a professor as well, a very distinguished guy up at Smith in Massachusetts. Can you provide some more details about how and why you were successful in picking the winners in NBA games?
Again, when you talk about being in a meeting, 11 o'clock in the morning, and somebody from the NBA league office coming in and saying, here's 15 things that we want you to concentrate on tonight, okay? And they put a tape up. and they show you play after play after play. Now, they're grading you on your performance that night, and you're possibly going to advance to a situation where you're going to go from the first round to the second round to the third round to the NBA Finals and make bonuses of $20, $30, $50, $100,000. You're going to do what the NBA league office wants you to do. You're going to make those calls. So with that being said, I knew that the referees were going to go out on the floor and do that, and teams were going to be at advantages and disadvantages. So if the line was, say, 4 or 5, with that information, it probably should have been 7, 8, 9, or even 10. So there was an advantage there. And if you know anything about the sports gambling world, if you have an advantage of 1, 2, 3 points, oh, that's like having the winning lottery numbers before the balls are drawn.
Let me bring in one of my students, Pablo from Ecuador. He's fascinated with international soccer and corruption and that. Pablo, please ask away. Ask Mr. Donaghy some questions.
Hi, how are you? First of all, I just want to thank you to give us the opportunity to talk to you. So, before I just go to my question, I just want to say something quick. You in your book, Personal Fall, in chapter 6, you mentioned that the NBA it's controlled by the small people. And my question is, do you believe that there was an act of conspiracy against you by the NBA in order to divert media attention to protect the industry by itself?
I'm sorry, you went in and out there for a minute, Pablo. Could you repeat that?
Sure, absolutely. So do you believe that there was an act of conspiracy against you by the NBA in order to divert media attention to protect the industry by itself?
No doubt about it. I think one of the biggest problems that upset Phil Scala, who did the whole investigation, which got him onto my side, was the fact that David Stern went out and held a press conference when he told him not to hold any press conferences, to let this thing play out, to the point where David Stern was out making comments that I was one bad apple in the bunch, when at that point Phil was doing a big investigation, sending agents all over the country, talking to general managers, coaches, owners, and former referees, and they were realizing that I was telling the truth, that there were times where people from the league office would call the group supervisor and have them go in halftime and tell them to have referees call certain things. So there's no doubt about it. There was a big cover-up to make the league look better than what they were in this whole scenario.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you very much. And my second question is, why do you think the movie Inside Game shows a different scenario from reality?
Well, I mean, obviously Hollywood is Hollywood. Inside Game was not a perspective that I was involved with. It was Tommy Martino. And, again, Hollywood's Hollywood. They try to dramatize different things and put things out there to what they think is going to be the most appealing to the fans out there to make the most money. So, unfortunately, you do different things and you want to make the most money that you can. And I can't fault them for that. But, that movie really had nothing to do with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pablo. Let me put you on the coals again, Tim. Are you still running your gambling advising site, your referee, refpicks.com?
It comes and goes. If people want to get involved in betting the NBA, I love it, because I like to talk to different people and find out, who they are, what they're about, and advise them on the ups and downs and the pitfalls of gambling. So again, if you're going to use gambling as a form of entertainment, I'll be more than glad to help you out. But
but aren't you, as a former gambling addict, isn't that a very thin ice to be skating on?
No doubt about it. But again, it wasn't my first choice of professions. But at the time before I got involved in other things, and I started that, there wasn't much for me to do out in the workforce. So I got involved in it, and it became so successful so quickly that I stayed with it. But it's not my primary source of income anymore. And it's something that was so successful at the time that I've just kept with it.
All right. This is the final question. it's been repeated a number of times off this question and answer thing. And it's, do you think betting on basketball should be permitted? Should there be legal sports gambling? And I'm going to divide it into two things. Should there be legal sports gambling on the NBA? And there should be legal sports gambling on NCAA basketball, Tier 1.
Absolutely, because it's going to happen either way, underground or overground with the mob. And I think if it's overground, there's a chance to regulate it. There's a chance for the each individual states to be able to benefit from the taxes. So with that being said, I think people are able to regulate it, monitor it, and you're going to see. We've had conversations with this before. You're going to see every arena throughout the country. You're going to be able to place a bet from the lower level seats when you sit there by swiping a credit card at some point. So I think it's better off that it's out in the open and it's regulated rather than keeping it underground with underground bookies in the mob.
All right. Tim Donaghy, thank you very much for coming and sharing your experience, your time with us. I'd also like to thank Chris Rasmussen, Vitaly Stepnover, Bill Olson, Joan Gorman, and everyone around the world, particularly our European colleagues and friends. It's the middle of the night. It's now, I think, 1:30, 1:40 in the morning, and these people have kept with us also in Australia, New Zealand, and everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tim.
Just, one more. At any time, if anybody has any questions, I'm available through email. And again, I'm an open book, and I'd be more than glad to answer any questions that somebody may have, after the fact that this is over.
Thank you again, Tim. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night, everyone around the world. Cheers.
This is Declan Hill. One note from that interview. Tim Donaghy's allegations are about the NBA during his time in the early 2000s. And since then, the league has put in an enormous amount of changes to prevent anything similar from occurring. I hope I made that clear during the interview. Thank you again for listening to the episode. We greatly value your time. If you appreciated the content, please go to our website and do the usual, like us and follow us on social media. Next week, join us again on Crime Waves. We're going to have an extraordinary tale of organized crime in international sports that, unlike the Donaghy case, is happening right now. Do please join us.